It doesn't belong to the second of those, like it's the
Not
not, it's
yet
exotic and
known.
not yet known.
Yeah, that's a fair question, Could I ask when, what period these naturalists were?
1760s and 1770s.
Really?
And one of them is the German translator of Buffon, a particular group I was thinking about just then.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I mean, the point I was trying to make in describing this particular attitude as a stowaway into the apparatus of modern science, well, what I was evoking there, trying to evoke, was the attitude of some of the people I cite, and others could be cited, from the 1750s, 60s, and 70s, who did make, or try to make, hard and fast distinctions between that which was empirically sound and rational, and that which was merely superstitious and wondrous and marvelous and nonsense. I mean, that after all is an important current, at least in France, it's an important current of Enlightenment thinking and scientific thinking in the 18th century, that we've got to sort out the wheat from the chaff. We have to put the superstition over here, the nonsense belongs over here. And I mean, you're right, that there's a gray area, I would acknowledge that, with hyenas and probably other objects of natural history. There's a way in which the hyena inhabits both not yet known, that which requires more investigation. But I think also, and I think much of the evidence for this article suggests this, that it was also associated with a whole realm of a whole way of thinking that savored mystery for its own sake, and savored the unknown for its own sake. I mean, I think probably the central paradox that I was trying to push in this paper was that between enlightenment and shadows, and that the expansion of enlightenment actually required the highlighting of shadow, shadow areas that were also good to think with, fun to think about, and inspiring of creativity in various ways, and it wasn't necessarily central to the scientific enterprise. Although, you know, I appreciate what you're saying. I get what you're saying, and maybe I draw too sharp a line. Possible.
Well, I think there was a line drawn. Most people would look at this and think, oh, it was the peasants who saw the hyena.
Right.
And then Louis XV sent his hunter in to kill the beast, but also to prove that it wasn't a fantastical creature, that it was an animal that could be killed. And then putting it on display at Versailles was to show people there are no hyenas in France.
Right.
I guess there are no slaves and there are no hyenas.
Right. I mean, how do we account for the simple fact that the hunter who did the killing, other huntsmen at Versailles, and naturalists of the day, apparently, pronounced this animal a wolf, yet, perfectly intelligent people continue to insist it was a hyena. In the face of what seemed to people at Versailles on October 1st, when this thing was displayed, pretty clear evidence it was a wolf. How do we account for that? I'm not sure that the as yet unknown imperative fully explains that.
Does it sort of go back to the feeling in people that, you know, when you know something, you cease to have awe over it at all, which isn't something that people want, I guess.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess it's just sort of
It would be very disappointing if it turned out just to be
right. Exactly.
And it almost doesn't seem enough of an explanation.
I mean,
you killed 100 people in 3
Yeah.
or 4 years.
True.
Right. You need an explanation commensurate with the devastation.
I thought just the choice of hyena in general was kind of striking. and it kind of took me into like this like exoticism and mysticism of the Orient, and like we have to have, it's clearly a creature from this part of the world that we need to further explore, so, and we haven't explored, and they have strange things over there in the world that's
Yes.
not here,
Sexy
over
us
there,
too.
it's like, you know, mystery.
Yeah, and that could make it a species of kind of contact narrative, you know, and thinking about Buffon. And I'm working on a British set of questions about exoticism and mysticism that's really close here. And there are some interesting cultural differences too in how the line is drawn. But were there any suggestions that the hyena had been brought in from Africa, or that so that's the dominant rational explanation. The lavish description of the body of the animal, all this sort of speculation, including the jewels for eyes, was fantastic, seems to though sort of track it back from the import to the talisman, right? To the like the sacred object or the magical being. I mean, the hyena is not an object, but it's this locus of all kinds of speculation that I'm certainly seeing some interesting parallels in some very weird plays, let's just say from the later 18th century on the London stage, that get very fetishistic about their objects and props, some of which are coming in from Tahiti.
Right.
So the imported body, the imported object can still be a locus of mysticism in a way that Western objects and Western bodies and Western
Right.
animals can't be.
Right.
That would be your sort of shadow, right?
Yeah, right.
But as a kind of ethnography.
Yeah, I mean, I think an unspoken, generally unspoken dichotomy that infuses the speculation about the Beast of the Gigolo in the 1760s is the dichotomy between civilized France and these exotic locales where strange beasts roam.
Yeah.
Africa, of course, but also the Gévaudan itself, which was sparsely populated, little known. Nobody ever traveled there because you didn't want to go there.
Hyenas.
So that, there's
Yeah.
this contrast between that which is civilized and that which is untamed and exotic.
You see a
Within
very,
France.
yeah, but it's a very similar set of attitudes about Derbyshire in England, which has these great caves that become bigger and bigger tourist attractions over this same period. And the rhetoric about the inhabitants of Derbyshire is that they are primitive, and that these spaces are they still have a mysticism and sort of current folklore, comments on that current folklore still talked about a genie in the cave, and I'm very drawn to the question of where do these sets of beliefs, longings, if you will, for a kind of more material world, where do they pop up in the earth, in the prop? That's a little more my question, but this just seemed to be so overlapping, and I want to recommend a brand new book that I just found by Sarah Kareem. It's called the 18th Century and the Reinvention of Wonder. The 18th century novel and the Reinvention of Wonder. It's just out from Oxford, and she does a great job of using Hume, for instance, to set up Robinson Crusoe, and to think about the relocation of wonder in an age of epistemology back into these discoveries where the lines are not so clear.
Great. 18th century novel and the reinvention.
And the Reinvention of Wonder, just out from Oxford. So as soon as the library puts a sticker on it, I get it. Looks promising.
Great.
Can I just say a little bit more actually about the issue of superstition in this whole story? Because I was curious, so is the idea that it's a hyena, is that primarily a kind of learned belief, or does that also become part of the rural stories that are told about it? And I mean, I guess I was wondering partly because it seems to me I'm also interested in this question of sort of how learned and rural knowledge interacted. It seems to me sometimes superstition can be a resistance to novelty. that at least in a lot of the things that I read, so that's one of the things that characterize, is they can't expand their imagination enough to imagine the marvelous that actually exists.
Good question. I would say that the superstition that officials on the ground and hunters and people back at Versailles were trying to combat actively during Eye of the Beast were superstitions that led locals to ascribe wondrous qualities to the wolf that they had allegedly seen, or the animal that they had allegedly seen. So it's true that the hyena hypothesis, if you can call it that, was more an intellectuals. This is what intellectuals did, the journalists and the literate. The hypothesis that villagers most often suggested was that the beast was some other form of animal, like a bear, a leopard, a panther, things that they heard about, or a werewolf or witch. I mean, that was also a common hypothesis among the villagers of the Gévaudan.
That's what I was gonna ask you about, because at one point you talked about the conflicting eyewitness testimony, the alleged physical characteristics of the culprit, the attack scene suggesting crimes of cruelty and cunning, and killing for cruelty and cunning, that's human. So there's some sort of half human beast thing, so the werewolf, that's interesting.
Yes. Right. So the superstitions were those the tendencies to see in this animal magical qualities, which then got translated into all sorts of hypotheses about what that thing might be, including mine. But it wasn't so much that the hyena belief itself was a superstition. Yes.
Building off of Mary's question, I mean, I was wondering too, because I think today the hyenas, because of their mimicry, are somewhat humanoid, right?
Acting,
Yeah, and you mentioned on page 34 that anecdote about speaking humans who attracted the hyena, and how hyena is attracted by human voices and then
Right.
subdued by music. And I was wondering if those sort of humanoid characteristics of the hyena that we see a little bit today were in circulation back then, and sort of as a parallel to that werewolf sorcery explanation. I mean, is this sort of this evil, dark Caliban, evil, other that's haunting, the
Gévaudan.
Yeah. I mean, did the hyena carry those same associations that it does today? I mean, and if so, would that have been some different? Yeah.
Why? I'm sure I can answer that one, except that this part of hyena lore, I think, goes back to the ancients, that they had the ability to mimic the human voice. I believe this is from Pliny. I think that's where it comes from, the original. And so it just kept getting recirculated, this piece of hyena lore, including by Buffon himself, who ostensibly discounts it, but nevertheless helps to keep it alive.
So sell his books too.
Yeah. That's an interesting suggestion, whether the hyena was sort of envisioned as another form of werewolf in a way.
It's a natural historian's werewolf or
Yeah.
something.
Could be. It could be that it took on a new valence in the 18th century for that reason. Could very well be.
Yeah, like sort of Grendel, I guess, and Beowulf, who is
Right.
humanoid back then, but monstrous, and the son of the spawn of Cain, I guess, nonetheless. Yeah. So
Actually, if I can bounce off of Hillary's point, this is gonna seem really perhaps random, but is there a consolidating discourse of geology at this point in France? The reason I ask is that we're starting to see inquiries that will become modern geology, 1760s, 1770s in England. The really big turning points are
early 19th century, like with Stratus Smith's map. But